Raymond Kensington's voice crackled through the baby monitor, whispering in a language that smelled of decay, wet earth and forgotten graves. I stood in the military garden's overgrown thicket, the air thick with the smell of decaying leaves clinging to my skin like a second layer. My breath fogged the monitor's cracked plastic casing, a tiny cloud in the molten bronze twilight. The cat watched from the rusted greenhouse archway, its fur matted with damp moss, the tiny bone amulet around its neck cracked like old porcelain. It didn't move, just observed, its yellow eyes reflecting the weak light like chips of shadow black. Drip drop, drip drop. The sound echoed from somewhere deep in the garden's ruins, a viscous fluid hitting cold metal. It synced with the frantic thud of my own pulse against my ribs. Fruity dust. The old pipes. I told myself, the skeptic in me clamping down. Fruity rust and rainwater. But the taste in my mouth was coppery, sharp as broken glass. And the whispering voice on the monitor wasn't mine. It slithered under my skin, a low vibration in the hollow of my throat. Tevanana. The word formed in the static, cold and clear, smelling of damp stone and something older. My knuckles whitened on the monitor. Who the hell is Eleanor? The whisper solidified, the monitor's plastic casing warming under my fingers, the smell of decay intensifying, like rotting lilies. The coppery taste flooded my mouth, metallic and thick. I saw it then. The porcelain doll tucked behind a crumbling stone bench, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, mimicking my own stance. But it wasn't moving. Fin just the reflection in the glass, I thought, forcing the words into my skull. Fin just the damn reflection. The drip drop grew louder, sharper trip. Drop, drip, drop, drop. Drop, drop. Each drop hitting the cold grate below the archway like a tiny, precise hammer. My hand jerked. The monitor slipped, the casing cracking further. The whisper became a shriek inside my own head, a sound like fabric ripping, tearing at the edges of my skull. Eleanor. The word wasn't just in the monitor anymore. It was in the dripping, in the rustling leaves, in the cold metal of the archway. The cat's yellow eyes flared, unblinking. Guardian Fizzen. The thought surfaced, unbidden and absurd. It's watching. Washing. The coppery taste choked me. The doll's blank eyes stared. The drip drop was now a steady, rhythmic fizz-blink, plink, plink on the grate, matching the frantic hammering in my chest. The whispering voice, Eleanor's voice, rose to a shriek that wasn't sound but pressure, a physical force pushing against my eardrums. Eleanor. Eleanor. The monitor's glass screen spiderwebbed with cracks, reflecting the molten bronze sky and the dead oak branch above. My own reflection was distorted, fractured. The doll behind the bench seemed to lean forward, its porcelain head mirroring my own, mouth open in silent mimicry. I couldn't breathe. The coppery taste was blood. The drip drop was my own heartbeat. The whisper was Eleanor's scream. My hand, slick with cold sweat, slammed the monitor against the rusted archway. It didn't just shatter. It snapped-y. A sound like a bone breaking, clean and final, followed by the sharp, crystalline funting-tink-tink of falling glass. The monitor's pieces glittered on the mossy ground like frozen tears. The drip-drop sound stopped. The garden held its breath, and the cat, still watching from the archway, let out a single, soft timero. The doll was half buried in the earth, its porcelain face upturned like a corpse waiting to be named. My fingers brushed the rotting leaves, each one brittle as old paper, the edges curling inward as if trying to shield whatever lay beneath. The copper taste hit first, a metallic rush that flooded my mouth before I could swallow it down. Just rust, I told myself, but the lie tasted sour, thick with the kind of dread that clings to the back of your teeth. I knelt, the damp earth seeping through my jeans, cold as a grave. The doll's face was semi-mean, same hollow cheeks, same painted smile, too wide, too knowing. The paint was cracked along the lips, flaking like dried blood. My breath fogged the air between us, a temporary shield. The garden exhaled around me, a low, wet sea from the rusted pipes, the whisper of wind through dead branches. The cat's yellow eyes flickered from the archway, unblinking, its matted fur drinking in the light like a thirsty thing. I reached for it. The moment my fingers grazed its shoulder, the doll's head snapped up. Not a turn, no. It was one precise sigh, the way a marionette moves when the strings are pulled just right. The painted eyes locked onto mine, black as oil slicks in a storm drain. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat in the silence. The doll's tiny fingers twitched, then curled around a shard of glass embedded in the dirt beside it. The sound of it scraping free was like a nail-on-glass shriek, sharp enough to cut the air. I stumbled back. The leaves crunched under my boots, each snap a gunshot in the hush. The doll's head tilted, mimicking my movement. its smile stretching wider, the paint splitting at the corners like fresh wounds. The drip drop from the pipe synced with my ragged breathing, a slow, mocking rhythm. Drop, drip, drop, drop. The cat's tail flicked once, slow as a pendulum, its amulet clinking against its ribs. Click, a sound like bones knocking together. The doll's arm lifted. The glass shard gleamed, catching the molten bronze light of the dying sky. My throat tightened. The copper taste surged again, thick and cloying, like blood mixed with pennies. The doll lunged. I didn't scream, didn't breathe. Time stretched, the air heavy as syrup. The shard stopped inches from my throat, suspended in midair like a bee caught in amber. The doll's painted mouth moved, silent, but the sound of it was a wet, thwarty smack inside my skull, like lips pressing against glass. My fingers twitched toward my own neck, tracing the pulse there, feeling the heat of my skin, the ghost of the blade's edge. Then, crack. The shard shattered against something unseen, the fragments exploding outward in a spray of glittering black. The doll's arm jerked back, its fingers curling into a fist. The garden held its breath. The drip-drop faltered, then resumed, slower now, like a heartbeat fading. The cat's eyes never left me, but its tail stilled. The doll's head lolled to the side, its painted smile frozen mid-grin, as if it had just realized it had failed. And then, nothing. The silence pressed down, thick as the earth. My hands trembled. The copper taste lingered, but beneath it, something else. The faint, acrid smell of burnt sugar. The doll's glass eyes stared at me, unblinking, waiting. I didn't look away. The fountain loomed, a crumbling monument to forgotten promises. It wasn't water that trickled from its stone lips, but something thicker, viscous, a dark fluid that smelled faintly of iron and despair. The crystallized regret entity coalesced before it, a shifting sculpture of fractured glass and shadow. It wasn't a form, not really, more like a distortion of the air, a heat shimmer given malevolent shape. And then the voice, Fofan Draymond. Darling. It was her, my mother. The sound scraped against my teeth, a rusty hinge protesting a long-abandoned door. My stomach clenched, a fist tightening around my insides. It wasn't a memory, not exactly. More like a broadcast, a signal bleeding through the static of my mind. The bronze light of the dying sky caught the edges of the crystalline form, painting it with a sickly, oily sheen. Why? Why do you torment yourself, Raymond? It wasn't your fault. The words were a physical blow. Nausea rolled over me, a wave of bile threatening to spill. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the voice away. Just a trick, I told myself. The thought a brittle shield against the rising panic, a projection, a phantom. A phantom. But the taste returned, the coppery tang, now sharper, more insistent. It coated my tongue, clung to the roof of my mouth. I opened my eyes. The entity hadn't moved. It tweeted, "Shut up." I managed, the words a croak. The voice didn't falter. "You can't escape it, Raymond. It's in your blood. It's in the garden." The drip-drop from the pipes intensified, a relentless percussion against my skull. Drip, drop, drip, drop, drop. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure, a physical weight pushing down on me. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound remained vibrating through my bones. The cat, a silhouette against the deepening shadows, blinked slowly, its amulet clicking. One, a dry, unsettling counterpoint to the dripping. Then, a strange absence, the smell, the decaying leaves, the wet earth, the metallic tang gone. Just the sound, the incessant, deafening drip-drop. A coldness spread through my sinuses, a hollowness where scent should have been. No, no, no. My gaze fell upon something new. Near the fountain's base, a jar sat upon a cracked stone. It was filled with black sand, fine as powdered charcoal. But it wasn't resting on the stone, it hovered suspended in midair, defying gravity. The sand within shifted and swirled, a miniature vortex of darkness. It was hypnotic, mesmerizing. I reached for it, a compulsion stronger than any rational thought. My fingers extended, drawn to the jar's smooth, cool surface. I braced myself for the touch, for the sensation of glass against skin. But my hand passed through. A jolt, a sickening lurch. The world twisted, the bronze light blurring into a kaleidoscope of shadow. The drip-drop escalated into a roar, drowning out all other sensation. I stumbled forward, my boots scraping against the stone, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Then, darkness, not the absence of light, but a tangible void, a suffocating weight pressing in on all sides. I fell, tumbling through an unseen space, the sensation of falling amplified by the relentless pounding in my ears. Fiven drip, drop, drop. Phew. The cat's amulet clicked, a mocking farewell. The voice, my mother's voice, faded into a whisper. You can't hide, Raymond, you can't hide. I landed hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. The ground beneath me was cold, uneven. I gasped, struggling to sit up, my head swimming. The darkness remained absolute and impenetrable. The drip-drop had subsided, leaving behind a ringing silence. I reached out, my hands brushing against something rough, something organic, roots maybe, or something else entirely. I couldn't tell. The coppery taste lingered, a phantom on my tongue. I was lost, utterly, irrevocably lost. The therapist's office smelled like antiseptic and old books, the kind of place where the air is so still it feels like holding your breath. I sat rigid in the chair, fingers hooked around the armrests, knuckles white. The pen in Dr. Voss's hand scratched against paper, scratch, 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 each stroke a needle pricking my skin. He was saying something about stress-induced hallucinations, his voice smooth, practiced, but the words didn't land. They skittered off the walls like rain on a tin roof. I swallowed. The copper taste was back, sharp and metallic, coating my throat. My tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, searching for the source. It wasn't there, just the memory of it clinging like rust. You mentioned a doll, he said, leaning forward. The pen stopped moving. The silence pressed in. I didn't answer. The doll's glassy eyes flashed behind my eyelids, staring, always staring, and I clenched my teeth. My hands trembled. Not fear, something worse. Recognition, the way it had tilted its head when I turned my back, the way its fingers had twitched mimicking mine. Raymond. Dr. Voss's voice cut through the haze. The pen started again, scratch, scratch, like a rat gnawing at something buried too deep. I forced the words out. I found a doll. In the garden. It moved like me. My voice was flat, hollow, the kind of voice you use when you're trying to convince yourself. The pen stilled. The drip-drop started. At first, I thought it was the faucet in the bathroom down the hall. Then I realized, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't water. It was slower, thicker, a wet, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across a grate. My stomach twisted. The garden, the fountain. The way the fluid had dripped, drip, drop, drop, drop. Drop, drop like a heartbeat counting down. Dr. Voss exhaled, a sound like a balloon deflating. You've been through a lot. It's natural to shut up. Shut up. The words exploded out of me. The pen snapped in his grip. Snap, and ink bloomed across the paper like a bruise. He flinched, but I didn't care. The drip-drop was louder now, a relentless pulse in my skull. My fingers dug into the armrests until the wood creaked. Outside, the cat sat on the windowsill. Its fur was the color of old bruises, its eyes two slits of molten bronze. The amulet around its neck, a cracked bone, yellowed with time, glinted in the light. It hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just watched. I stood so fast the chair screeched against the floor. The therapist's breath hitched, but I didn't look at him. My gaze locked onto the cat. The amulet pulsed, a slow, rhythmic glow, like a heartbeat, like the drip-drop, like the doll's eyes. The window was my only way out. I raised my arm, the glass was old, frosted at the edges. I didn't hesitate. My elbow struck the pane crack, and the world split open. Shards exploded inward, a storm of ice and light. The drip-drop surged, a tidal wave of sound, and the cat's amulet flared white-hot, like a brand pressed against my skin. The copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and choking, and I knew I was back in the garden. The corridor smelled like wet concrete and rusted hinges, the air thick enough to choke on. My boots crunched over something brittle glass, maybe or the shattered spine of an old ledger. The drip-drop pulsed in my ears, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I pressed my palm against the wall, the surface slick with something damp and greasy. Not water, something older, something that had been waiting. The cat moved ahead, its tail flicking like a whip against the cracked tiles. The amulet around its neck throbbed, a dull, molten bronze glow seeping through the bone's fractures. It didn't look back, didn't need to. The way it walked, purposeful, unhurried, told me it knew the path better than I ever could. A groan echoed from the ceiling, a sound like wood splitting under pressure. I didn't wait to see what fell. I followed the cat, my fingers brushing the jagged edges of the wall as I passed. The fabric of my jacket snagged on something, a nail maybe, or a splinter of metal, and tore with a sound like a tear in flesh. The cat's ears twitched, but it didn't stop. Neither did I. The floor beneath me gave way with a sudden wet swin snap, and I dropped into darkness. The drip drop surged, drowning out the sound of my landing. My hands hit something soft, rotted fabric maybe, or the remains of an old curtain. I pushed up, my pulse hammering in my throat. The cat was already gone. Then I saw it. The room was a graveyard of mirrors, each one shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, reflecting not my face, but the faces of others, versions of me, each one frozen in a moment of screaming, of falling, of blood. The drip drop was louder here, a chorus of voices whispering my name. I swallowed, and the copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and metallic. My knees buckled. The cat reappeared at the edge of the room, its amulet pulsing brighter now, casting long, shifting shadows across the broken glass. It turned its head, and for a second I swear its eyes weren't eyes at all, but two black holes staring back at me. Then it moved, padding toward a mirror that wasn't like the others. This one was whole, unbroken, its surface gleaming like a pool of oil. I followed, my boots silent against the debris. The fabric of my shirt caught on something, a nail, a splinter, and tore again, the sound sharp and final. The cat stopped at the mirror's edge, its tail lashing. It didn't look at me. It never did. The room trembled. The drip drop became a roar, a storm of sound, and the mirrors around me began to shake, their reflections writhing like living things. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the glass. The cat's amulet flared white-hot, and I knew I had to go through. I didn't hesitate. My hand passed through the mirror like it wasn't there, and the world split open. The drip drop became a scream, a sound that wasn't mine, wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. The cat vanished into the glass, its form dissolving into the fractured reflection like smoke in the wind. And then, silence. The air in the mirror room was thick with the scent of old blood and something sharper, ozone, like the moment before a storm breaks. My boots sank into something soft, the remnants of a carpet long since devoured by time, and I stepped forward, my breath fogging the glass before me. But the reflections didn't fog. They fully moved dead. The first one showed a man my grandfather, maybe his uniform torn, his face a mask of raw, weeping flesh. His mouth opened, and the word Ford Eleanor slithered out in a whisper, a sound that wasn't sound but the memory of it pressing against my skull. The glass behind him cracked like ice, and the reflection split, his face doubling, tripling, each version screaming the same name. The drip drop slowed, each plop of viscous liquid syncopating with the shattering, like a heartbeat counting down. I reached out, and my fingers passed through the glass as if it were water. The cold bit into my skin, not the cold of metal or stone, but the cold of regret, the kind that seeps into your bones and never leaves. The reflection of my hand didn't match mine. It was older, wetter. The fingers curled into a fist, and the glass wept black tears. The cat was at the edge of the room, its amulet pulsing like a dying star. The bronze glow cast jagged shadows across the floor, and I realized the shadows weren't cast by the light. They were the light, writhing things with teeth and claws, clawing at the edges of my vision. I swallowed, and the copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and metallic, like I'd bitten into a rusted nail. Another mirror. This one showed a woman, my mother, or some version of her, her hands deep in a sink full of soapy water, bubbles rising like ghosts. The child in her arms wasn't breathing. The glass above her head fractured, and the reflection of the child's face pressed against the surface, its mouth moving in silent screams. Eleanor, it mouthed. The drip drop slowed further, each drop heavier, each shatter louder, until the room was nothing but the sound of breaking glass and the weight of a name that wasn't mine. I turned, and the cat was gone. Only the amulet's glow remained, a beacon in the dark. I stepped toward it, my boots crunching over something brittle bone, maybe, or the remnants of a dream. The shadows at the edges of the room twisted, stretching longer, sharper, their edges glinting like broken teeth. Then I saw Thifid. The entity wasn't a man or a woman or anything that had ever lived. It was a mass of crystallized regret, a thing of jagged edges and hollow eyes, its form shifting between the faces of every ancestor who had ever suffered here. It loomed behind the cat's empty space, its hands outstretched, fingers dripping with the same black liquid that filled the room. The drip drop surged again, a roar of sound, and the mirrors around me began to shake, their reflections writhing like living things. I didn't look back. I reached for the amulet's glow, my fingers brushing the cat's fur, still warm, still real, and the world split open. The glass gave way beneath my touch, not breaking but twin-folding, like a door opening into another world. The drip drop became a scream, a sound that wasn't mine, wasn't anything I'd ever heard, and the entity's hands closed around the empty air where I'd been standing. The cat's shadow vanished into the glass, dissolving like smoke in the wind, and then a hand, cold and jagged, closed around my ankle. The roots bit into my skin like 1,000 needles, each tendril tightening around my wrists, my ankles, my throat. I didn't scream. Screaming was useless here. Sound dissolved into the drip-drop, the slow, relentless trim-plink-plink-plink of black sand falling through air that wasn't air but something thicker, slower like molasses in winter. The garden's heart wasn't a garden at all. It was a mouth, and I was the meal. The first flash came without warning. A woman's voice, wet and ragged, screaming a name that wasn't Eleanor, Margaret. The name hung in the air, a corpse floating in a pond. I saw her then, my grandmother, or the version of her this place had carved from memory, kneeling in the dirt, her hands bound behind her back, her fingers twitching like dying spiders. The roots coiled around her wrists, black and glistening, and I realized with a jolt that they weren't roots at all. They were veins, thick and pulsing, feeding on something darker than blood. The drip-drop surged, and the world twin-shattered. Not like glass, not like anything clean. It was the sound of a body breaking apart from the inside, the wet crack of a bone giving way, the squelching of organs collapsing under their own weight. My grandmother's head lolled forward, her neck a raw, weeping stump, and the black sand in the jar beside her, where my jar began to rise, defying gravity like a tide pulled by something unseen. It coiled around her throat, seeping into her open mouth, her eyes, her ears, and she didn't scream anymore. She just melted, her form dissolving into the sand as if she'd never been anything but a dream. The roots tightened. I clawed at them, my nails splitting, my skin tearing, but the tendrils only dug deeper, burrowing into my flesh like worms into rotten fruit. The drip-drop slowed again, each drop heavier, each priplink free, a hammer blow against my ribs. I could feel the crystalline entity pressing against the edges of my vision, its hollow eyes watching, its jagged mouth forming words that weren't words but the shape of screams. Then movement. The cat. It stood at the periphery of the prison, its amulet pulsing like a dying ember, casting jagged shadows that writhed across the roots, binding me. The bronze glow flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw its eyes, human eyes, not animal, filled with something like pity. Or was it hunger? The amulet cracked further, the bone splitting like dry wood, and the cat's fur stood on end, each strand glinting with the same black sand that had consumed my grandmother. I lunged, not toward the cat, toward the jar. The black sand was warm now, almost alive, and when my fingers brushed its surface it twin-moved, rippling like water, and the roots screamed. A sound like fabric tearing, like flesh being peeled from bone. I gasped as the tendrils recoiled, snapping back into the earth, and I was free. For 3 seconds, then the roots lashed out again, faster this time, wrapping around my ankles, my knees, my chest, and I was pinned, my back arched, my throat raw from holding in the scream that wanted to escape. The cat hissed, a sound like steam escaping a broken pipe, and the amulet's glow dimmed, then flared, then dimmed again as if it were breathing. The drip-drop began to rise, not from the jar, from free mine. Black sand oozed from my pores, seeping from the corners of my eyes, the edges of my mouth, my fingers, my toes. I could feel it crawling under my skin, filling my veins, my lungs, my heart, and I knew if it reached my brain, I would become what my grandmother had been. A memory, a ghost, a name screamed in the dark. The cat's shadow stretched across my chest, long and jagged, its claws digging into the roots holding me. The roots, his scream died again, and the jar of black sand trembled, the sand inside churning like a storm. Then, silence. The drip-drop stopped. The roots went slack. I collapsed to my knees, my body slick with the stuff, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. The cat stood over me, its amulet now a single pulsing point of light, and the crystalline entity was gone. For now, the jar of black sand sat beside me, its contents still, its surface smooth as glass. And then, a hand, cold and jagged, closed around my wrist. The copper taste was back, thick and metallic, coating my tongue like old pennies left in the rain. I spat, but it didn't go away. Just pooled at the back of my throat, warm and cloying like the last sip of a drink left too long in the sun. My fingers trembled as I worked at the roots still clinging to my wrists, the fibers snapping like frayed twine. The garden exhaled around me, the scent of decaying leaves clinging to the air like a shroud. I didn't smell it anymore. Not really, but my body remembered. My nose twitched, and for a second, I swore I caught the rot beneath the damp earth, the slow ferment of things buried too deep. The cat watched, always watching its amulet pulsed once, twice, the bone cracking further, and I flinched. The jar of black sand lay beside me still and smooth, but the weight of it pressed against my ribs, a phantom ache. I couldn't afford to look at it. Not yet. I forced myself to my feet, my legs unsteady, my skin slick with the sand that had seeped into my pores. The garden shifted around me, the shadows stretching like fingers, the drip-drop now a steady rhythm, a drumbeat counting down to something. I moved toward the overgrowth, the undergrowth thick with vines and thorns that caught at my sleeves. The fabric tore shish, the sound like a breath being held too long before release. I didn't look back. The chamber was there, hidden behind a tangle of roots, the entrance just wide enough for me to slip through. The air inside was thicker, heavier. The drip-drop here a staccato, each drop landing on the cold grate with a wet thud. The walls were lined with them. Dolls, all of them, their porcelain faces frozen in screams that never ended. Eleanor's face, my face, the same mouth, the same eyes, the same terror etched into the cracks of the paint. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold surface of one, and the copper taste flared sharp and sudden. The book was there, half buried in the dirt, its pages yellowed and brittle. I pulled it free, the fabric of the cover splitting at the seam with a dry trunk crunch. The pages rustled as I turned them, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, each turn revealing more of the ritual, more of the words that had carved this place into being. The drip-drop accelerated, the drops larger now, heavier, the fuller D of them against the grate echoing, like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. The dolls' heads turned. Not all at once. No, that would have been too easy. It was one by one, their necks creaking as they followed my movement, their porcelain eyes locking onto mine. The copper taste turned to acid, burning the back of my throat. I swallowed and the book slipped from my fingers, the pages fluttering to the ground like wounded birds. The fingers moved first, just a twitch, a single digit curling toward my neck. Then another. The fabric of my shirt tore. Shh. The sound like a whisper, like a name being spoken too softly to be heard. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare. The dolls leaned in, their faces inches from mine, their breath cold and stale, their smiles too wide, too knowing. The drip-drop slowed, each drop hanging in the air for a second before falling. The feathered, now a gunshot, a death knell. The fingers brushed my skin, cool and smooth, and I flinched. The cat's amulet pulsed, a single, jagged light, and the dolls froze. Their fingers hovered, suspended in midair. Their eyes locked onto mine. The copper taste was gone, replaced by nothing, by silence, and then the fingers moved again. This time, they didn't twitch. They free-grabbed. The porcelain face exploded at my heel. Crash, a shower of white fragments skittering like broken teeth across the stone, each shard catching the dim light and splitting it into jagged daggers. I didn't look down. The dolls were moving now, their necks twisting in unison, the creak of their joints a wet, grinding switch squeak that slithered up my spine. One lunged, its arms snapping out like a broken marionette's, fingers grazing my sleeve. Shh, the fabric unraveling in a slow, deliberate tear. I yanked away, the sound of rending cotton too loud, too close, and the copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and cloying like the last gulp of a poisoned drink. The garden swallowed my scream. Or maybe it was just the wind low and guttural, like a man whispering through clenched teeth. The dolls were everywhere now, their porcelain bodies cracking open as they moved, revealing hollow interiors where something dark and glistening pulsed like a second heartbeat. The drip-drop had turned to a chorus each thud of viscous fluid hitting the grate, now a staccato counterpoint to the crunchud of breaking dolls. A macabre rhythm guiding my retreat. I stumbled back, my boot catching on something half buried in the dirt. A doll's head, its glassy eyes still locked onto mine. Its smile too wide, too knowing. I kicked it aside, and the impact sent a fresh wave of shards spiraling into the air, each one catching the light like 1,000 tiny knives. The cat was there again, its black fur a shifting shadow at the edge of my vision. The amulet around its neck pulsed once, twice, crack. A jagged light splitting the air between us, and the dolls froze. Not all at once. No, that would have been too merciful. They hesitated, their movements stuttering like a film reel skipping, their fingers twitching an inch from my skin. The copper taste retreated, leaving only the sour tang of fear in my mouth. I didn't wait. I ran. The tunnel was there, a hollow eye socket in the wall of dolls, a gaping maw of black sand that glistened like wet asphalt under the dim light. The cat darted in first, its paws sinking into the sand with a soft squelchy, and I followed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The tunnel was narrow. the walls slick with the same black substance, my fingers leaving smudges as I scrambled forward. The drip-drop faded behind me, replaced by the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears, the shush of fabric tearing as the doll's fingers brushed against the opening. I didn't look back ahead. The tunnel twisted, the air growing thicker, heavier. The cat's amulet flared again, crack, and the darkness ahead split open, revealing another chamber, another horror. The sound of rending fabric echoed from somewhere ahead, a slow, deliberate fun. Shh, that made my skin crawl. The tunnel seemed to shift around me, the walls pressing in, the black sand slipping under my boots with every step. The cat paused at the edge of the chamber, its back arched, its eyes locked onto something I couldn't see, and then the tunnel closed behind me. Not all at once. No, that would have been too easy. It was a slow, suffocating squeeze, the black sand seeping into the cracks, filling the space between the dolls, knitting them back together. The last thing I saw was the cat's tail flicking, the amulet pulsing one final time, crack, and then the darkness swallowed me whole. Ahead, the shh of fabric tearing grew louder, and then a hand reached out from the shadows. The molten bronze pools pulsed with a sickly inner light, casting jagged, liquid shadows that clung to the walls like tar. Shadow black swallowed the chamber's edges, a deeper darkness that seemed to breathe. The air hung thick, heavy with the scent of hot metal and the cloying, decaying sweetness of forgotten leaves. My tongue tasted copper again, thick and metallic, flooding my mouth as the drip-drop began. Not a single sound now, but 1,000 converging echoes. Drip, drip, drip. From the unseen source above, each drop hitting the cold grate below with a wet thwack, merging with the distant, wet thwack, shh, of fabric tearing somewhere unseen. The crunching of porcelain shards from the garden, the distorted hiss of the wind through broken glass. It built a roaring pressure inside my skull. The sounds not just heard but felt as vibrations in my teeth, my bones. My fingers, slick with sweat, traced the slick, hot surface of a pool. It wasn't water. It was molten bronze, seeping through the cracks in the stone floor, shimmering with trapped light. Shh. The sound of fabric tearing closer now, right behind my ear. I didn't turn. The reflection was there, waiting in the pool's surface. It was me, but not. The face staring back was older, etched with lines I didn't carry, eyes holding a depth of sorrow I couldn't fathom. The lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear over the roar. The reflection's hand lifted, mirroring my own, then began to further shred itself, the porcelain skin cracking like ice, revealing the molten bronze beneath, glowing with a malevolent light. Shh. The tearing was louder now, impossibly close, as if my own skin was being peeled back. The copper taste intensified, flooding my throat, making me gag. The reflection's eyes locked onto mine, wide with the terror that was my own, screaming silently. Crunch, shh, drip, drip. The sounds were a physical force hammering my temples, the reflection's mouth opening wider, forming the scream I felt trapped inside me. I had to touch it to break it, to see if the scream was real. My hand, trembling, pressed against the searing surface of the pool. The heat burned through my skin, a white-hot brand. The reflection shattered, not into glass, but into 1,000 fragments of molten bronze, each one reflecting a different screaming face. My mother's, my father's, the faces of the others who'd vanished into the garden's hunger. The scream wasn't in the reflection anymore. It was inside me, a soundless, tearing thing. The chamber tilted. The molten pools surged, rising like liquid fire seeking to consume me. The drip-drop sound became a single deafening thud, the sound of a heart stopping. The shah of tearing fabric ceased. The whispering wind died. Only the silence of the void remained, thick and suffocating. Then the final sound. A single, perfect drip. Ficted trip. Drip clear, cold, impossibly loud in the sudden, crushing silence. It hit the grate below with a sound that echoed in the hollow space where my breath had been. The molten bronze pools receded, leaving only the shadow-black walls and the empty chamber. The copper taste vanished, replaced by the cold metallic tang of blood. Not mine. The reflection was gone. Only the echo of the drip remained, hanging in the air like a promise. I stood, unmoving. In the center of the chamber, my body rigid, my breath gone, my eyes fixed on the spot where the reflection had been. The chamber held its breath. The drip-drop was the only sound left in the world. Tim. And then, nothing. Just the cold stone beneath my feet, the endless shadow black, and the silence of a body found unmoving.